we have places, we have points of contact and issues in which we all care about, that we can all focus on. And as long as we can start getting some resources into these areas, and I'll talk about that more later, then we can really start to kind of mesh this. We have to stay out of these culture wars that are coming in. We have a big messaging problem in general because we tend to focus on the divisions between us instead of the things that bring us together.
Mark, does some of what Laura painted, is that similar to Westmoreland and Fayette County?
Yes, definitely similar to Westmoreland and Fayette County. Hopefully everybody can hear me, and it is a pleasure to join the other panelists as well as the group. It's certainly an honor to be here. I think one of the things Nick just touched on is something that really resonates with me and with Voice of Westmoreland specifically in PA United. So Voice of Westmoreland developed approximately 4 years ago after the 2016 election. 4 individuals got together and said, we need to affect some sort of change. It was Muslim issues and the bans that the Trump administration was trying to. So they got together, but they wanted to see action. And the way they developed the organization attracted me to it. And going back to the next point, they identified that it's important to establish what the organizational values are and what values are important in the community, and then to empower people to act on those values. And that's what attracted me to the organization. That's how they proved me wrong in my initial impressions of Fayette County, and how there was so much apathy and lack of willingness to get engaged and do things. So that really attracted me to Voice of Westmoreland. So Alex is the coordinator with Voice of Westmoreland, or with PA United, and Selena is the organizer with Voice of Westmoreland. And
hey, Mark, I'm sorry to cut in. I think for some of us, your audio is breaking up. I hate to do this, but maybe if you turn off your camera.
Oh, certainly.
Say some more.
Is that any better? Can you hear me any better?
Yeah.
Okay, could be the mic. So anyway, getting back to the values related issues. So Voice of Westmoreland, specifically with regard to the protection of voter rights in Pennsylvania, I think it's essential. And what Voice of Westmoreland demonstrated for me, and as part of the data and tech team, what they demonstrated for me is, while I agree with Laura, is that fulcrum is very critical for your close network. The frustration in Fayette County is the network was small. Whereas Voice of Westmoreland, you identify the value, and the way they identified it in the past and we identified it in the past was, the value is, we believe it's fair for everybody to easily vote in Pennsylvania. Easy and accessible for everybody to vote. When you're talking to somebody in those text messages, that's an easy buy-in for the majority of the people that you talk to. That's an easy buy-in. So the next step is very short to say, okay, you agree with this value, then where can we proceed? We need you to sign a petition. So you keep on building that value. What I was stunned with and impressed with is, so Voice of Westmoreland with PA United has been able to figure out a systematic way to accomplish that. In 1 hour, they can text out, and I'm sure other members have done this, make text to 10 to 15,000 people. In that, they will find 10 to 15 people who will engage in continued meetings. And of that 10 to 15 people, 4 to 5 of them will become activists and will be on the next calls in the next week, trying to recruit people about these issues. So what they did is, the fulcrum isn't close at all, as Laura said, but they're able to sift through all the data and all the people out there and attract and find people. And that has been very rewarding. The other aspect and other efforts that they make about having continued conversations and really meaningful conversations is the deep canvassing. The deep canvassing is critical. And the project that we worked on in conjunction with PA United, I'll stick out a link for that as well, is in approximately a 2-month period of time, 100,000 calls. Of those 100,000 calls, we reached and had meaningful conversations, as we classify it, with about 9,000 people. That's a 15 to 20 minute call. And of those 9,000 people, in our metric, where we asked them initially in the conversation how they were feeling about the election, at the end of the conversation, they changed. They shifted slightly towards our position. So those deep canvassing conversations are really essential to understand what your community is doing, how they're feeling about specific issues, and then to empower them to get. So thank you again.
I think Jess is going to add some about the Northeast PA. Go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you to everyone. I really appreciate the invite, and it's great to be speaking with you all. Yeah, so what we see here in Northeast PA, which is like always a challenge too, because everyone defines Northeast PA a little differently. It's kind of, you know, the same as the what is rural, what is urban. It's like what do the regions mean? But we've got a huge region that our organization covers, and it is a combination of, you know, some small cities, but also some extremely rural areas. But what I really wanted to note, and I appreciate, Laura, your map is a perfect lead off to this. We saw the same things throughout this region, where there had not been any dedicated organizing done in Northeast PA really up until 2017. Like, it just had not existed. So I see that map with those blue shifts, right? As like really encouraging because of the groups that now exist and are working constantly. And one thing about the relational piece, as it connects to the sort of voter outreach that we think of more traditionally, we saw here in, I'm coming to you from Columbia County. So not even what, a lot of people don't even know where that is, but you know, most people think of Northeast PA, right, as Luzerne and Lackawanna counties. It's Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, and for sure that's included. But here in Columbia County, it's a big county. A lot of it is very rural. We saw one of our chapters of our organization really continue to grow even after the pandemic shut down. And we started looking at what was making that happen, because it's like everyone changed what they were doing a bit, but what we saw was continued growth. And what we realized was that it came from a very coordinated, very thoughtful outreach campaign that particular chapter was doing. And it was 100% just relational organizing without the name. You know, that's exactly what they were doing. And what that allowed them to do, then that became our biggest feed of new volunteers, of new members, of the people who were doing the more traditional, you know, texting, that sort of thing, phone banking, you know, postcard writing, all of those things that we do. So I think it's just really important to note, because I think the one thing that I would say about rural areas that might be uniform is that every rural progressive thinks that they're the only rural progressive in their area, right? We see that every time we're out knocking on doors. You hear that when you're on the phones. You see it in interactions on social media. So just those little connections make such a huge difference when you're connecting on values that are important to people. When you ask someone in your community about their experiences with the healthcare system, they've got a story, right? There's no one that doesn't have that story. And taking advantage of those opportunities to say, okay, well, here's what we believe. We believe that everyone should have access to affordable healthcare. It's hard to argue with that, right? Even if you think someone has a different, you know, political view. You know, political is a problematic term. Everything's political, and I think we all know that. But there's a clear trigger in people's mind when you ask them about politics. But when you do speak to them about the issues that matter to them and that are important to them, that is the way in to then build the network to do all of those other things that we need to do. And I think that that's what's really important, and we need to remember that, because that is the one thing that can connect all of the work that we're doing. and I'm really glad that Mark mentioned just making sure that people understand that it should be easy to vote. It shouldn't be hard to vote. Those kinds of connections with people where you say, well, don't you want everyone to be able to vote? Most people, when you ask them that, will say, yes, absolutely, we want that. But countering the misinformation that is coming at people all the time is critical. So it starts with those one-to-one conversations, and that's what you can grow a network for, to do all the other more traditional and still important voter outreach that we need to do. But if you don't make those initial connections, you're never going to grow the network to be able to do that.
I'm wondering if we can, taking all those good comments, one of the themes for this weekend in the legislative panel after this is the specific context we face now, where we have the GOP in Pennsylvania and across the country proposing all kinds of bills to limit voting in different ways. And of course, we had the Act 77. I feel like that's sort of been, I just realized, maybe an unspoken elephant in the room, which of course was sponsored by the GOP after they decided they didn't like it. So I'm wondering if any of the panelists want to talk about does the current context of democracy and voter protection matter? And I'll throw out another thing, which is my own working hypothesis is that there are two great social movements in America right now. There's a progressive movement, and there's, I'm going to call it a fascist, racist, white supremacist movement. And they have political parties that sort of dance around them, but those are the two underlying movements. And so in my mind, and maybe you disagree, the things about specific policies about election and voting and other things are linked to that. So, if that's too much of a third rail, you don't have to go there, panelists, but anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, I can, if I may. Yeah, I think you might be right about the two movements, Jordy, but I would venture to say that the fascist movement is much smaller. It's much smaller. They're just louder, and it's that very, very vocal minority. Because, but I think that when we think about some of the words coming out of the GOP right now, again, I referenced this in my opening, it's the culture war. They're focusing on cultural issues and not focusing on issues that everyday Americans really need. Yes, they definitely have the concentrated media, Jess, and they don't focus on the issues that everyday Americans need. Right now, there are so many people dealing with the after effects and the ongoing pandemic. We're in a mode of either rescue or recovery and trying to figure out what's going on there, but we're not hearing a lot of messaging from the GOP about that. They're still railing on elections, and they're still doing things. And I want to highlight another effort of theirs to undermine our election integrity in the future is judicial gerrymandering. Which is one of the projects we're working on at the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. And for those of you who don't know, judicial gerrymandering is an effort by the GOP in Pennsylvania to create a constitutional amendment that would make it so that we vote for our judges. Normally we vote for a lot of our judges in the higher courts, especially the Supreme Court on a statewide level. They want to make it so you can vote for your Supreme Court justices based on the district they live in, which would then, allow them to then gerrymander those districts in order to, and all of this is really Rep. Russ Diamond's kickback or attempt at revenge because the Pennsylvania Supreme Court didn't back them with the ridiculous election lawsuits that they put forward. I think this is a real issue, and that we need to continue to push back on this. It's like Jess said, though, it's really hard to argue with the idea that it should be easy for us to vote. It should be easy for us to vote whenever we want and however we want. And when we lead our conversations off with this shared value, we're able to kind of cut through some of this red tape. We're able to kind of cut through some of this top level messaging that their loud echo chamber has been pounding for generations, and really get to the heart of the matter. What makes our lives better? With criminal justice reform, and I'm an abolitionist even, I want to see the abolishment of the police state entirely, and that's police and jails. People always ask me, well, what happens then? Well, I started that conversation off by, don't we all want our neighborhoods to be safe? You start that with that shared value. Won't we want all of our neighborhoods to be safe? And you go from there, and we learn, as you continue talking to me, you're more than likely to learn that statistics and studies show that our neighborhoods are less safe when there's more police, that it's less safe when we've got a revolving door in our local jail, and once we get to that point, we're able to move forward and find some ways forward together. it takes a mix of the deep canvassing effort that Mark was talking about and the traditional campaign efforts that we typically see during election season. But it takes a mix of urban and rural messaging as well. You know, I want to address a question that I saw in there about going to the hoods and hollers.
Can you wait until we get to the question period? I'll bring it back up, Nick.
Sure.
Yeah. Laura or Mark or Jess, about this question about how do the current context of efforts to restrict voting, how does that relate to the rural part?
I mean, I'll just jump in to say you're absolutely right about the tack that the Pennsylvania GOP and the Republican Party nationally is taking. But when people talk about, when you say, sort of fascist movement, I'm always wary about sort of collapsing the distance between sort of what we think about what the GOP electeds are doing, where the anti-small d democratic cynicism, as far as I can tell, currently knows no bounds. And people who may see themselves as aligned with, in sympathy with, voting GOP at this point, but who are also, like, at a pretty basic level, are often just functioning with a very different understanding what the facts are of what's happened. So it's not even, and I think it can elevate and worsen misunderstandings, and also make progressives want to just walk away from investing in rural areas when they think, wow, we're all looking at the same number, exactly the same facts about what's happening, and they're voting for Donald Trump or they're voting for ex-congressman, even though they're seeing the same facts that I am. Wow, there must be nothing that we could talk about because their values must be so different from mine. So once you recognize that actually in crucial ways, we are not dealing with the same sort of basic facts. We are viewing through our media and social media very different images of the current reality. That, on the one hand, is, for me as a historian, really worrisome. But on the other hand, for activists, I think actually sort of opens the door to be like, oh, well, there's a space of empathy there then, because maybe I can understand better their concerns or their fears or what images are in their mind. When I say police or protest, they are imaging, they're thinking of a whole different set of things that they have been told have happened, most of which have not happened. So, and it's not that you're going to start the conversation there, but being aware of the fact that there really are more, and this is just to echo what Nick and Mark and Jess have said, the working outward from values creates a huge space of common ground so that you can become the trusted interlocutor. And that, to me, is like the crucial piece that I think some progressive organizing groups sometimes think about, okay, there's deep canvassing and there's like light touch canvassing or voter outreach, but like, what about the ongoing just conversations with people you know? We can't count those. Those aren't showing up on any metric, but that's the space where you become, you spread outward through your own networks and become the trusted interlocutor. And it's not about today's conversation or tomorrow's, but over time, that is what's going to give you the space to sort of reintroduce some, common reality.
You have no idea how well you just set me up for a story, but I had an experience in the fall with someone who is extremely close to me in my family. I know we have generally different views on a lot of economic issues, but this is someone who definitely is with most of us on a lot of social issues, but who came to me at two different points. One was when she said, I just don't understand why, and I think we've all had these conversations, why would we want to defund the police? And I said, okay, I understand your question. Because at first I was because I'm super close to this person in my life, and I got like a little frustrated where it's like, she's like, well, but then everything will just be chaos and whatever. I said, okay, let's take it back. Wouldn't you rather see problems solved in a non-violent way? You were upset by the video that you saw a few months ago, right? Well, yes, but, and I kept getting those arguments. And then finally it just clicked to me that it's like, she's never had this conversation before. Like, this was a first time for her to ever really think about what the situation really is. So talking to her about what it can mean, and I apologize for my cat, what it can mean to not have the police be the biggest part of your budget in the community. What can it mean for more social work, more mental health experts to be addressing situations and to get citizens of any community out of the sense of there is only one way to solve these problems that exist. Those sorts of things. And she said, well, but they didn't say that. Like that was her stress. And we've all had like the discussions of whether like defund the police was, you know, helpful or harmful. And in that situation, I think it was really helpful, because if someone had just listed a litany of potential responses to these things, she would have glossed right over it, right? She would have been like, oh yeah, that sounds good. But because it did stick in her mind and she came to me and said, you know, I just don't understand it. How could we do that? That unlocked it. And I could have that conversation with her about the potential ways that we can make our communities safer for everyone. And she said, but I just never thought of it that way. And I think those are the sorts of conversations that can really, really change things. But when they're only getting the misinformation piece, because this is someone who then a month later said, I just don't understand how you want me to vote for Biden. He can't put a complete sentence together. I said, okay, where are you getting that information? Have you watched a speech or any sort of interaction? Or are you just getting that from social media? And again, having that conversation of like, please be a responsible consumer of information and that sort of thing. Because the way that those things are connected is that she didn't have someone that she could really trust, whether it was me or whether it's a news source, right? Just sort of laying out that there are other possibilities than what you're seeing, and that it's not simple, you know, we're going to do this thing and it's going to be really scary. Because she was scared in both of those situations. Like that fear is what drove her to ask both of those questions. And they might not seem connected, but that fear came from somewhere, because that's what's being put out by the other side. So having the ability to have a discussion about things that I know that this person cares about, and I know that she's an empathetic person, I know she cares about her community and about her country. So once it clicked that this is like an unregistered or an undecided voter and someone who wants to know about progressive solutions in our communities, it changed things for me, and it definitely changed things for her in the end. So having those conversations is so critical.
Hopefully I can make a brief comment here, because I have a tendency to ramble. But in any event, I agree. I think those fear-based campaigns are effective. But from what I've seen, they only seem to be effective in the short term. And my concern is that when you try and talk to somebody about a fear-based campaign, there's another fear, there's another reason, and you go down this path of trying to change their mind about a fear. So when you convert it or you switch it to that value-based effort, and that's why I was a little concerned when I first read protecting voting rights. We're not, while in fact we may be protecting voting rights, people are going to be receptive to the ease of voting and the accessibility of voting. That's the commonality. And when you have that type of discussion, it's not a potential hole in the boat that we're all sitting in. It is a hole. You know, there is a hole there if we can demonstrate the impact of these. Whereas if we say, well, this is a fear, this is some fear that somebody else is escalating for whatever reason, there's actually no hole in the boat that we're trying to solve a problem on. And that's why I think the value conversations is so critical.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. And you didn't say this, but I imagine there's some deep connections between Jess's story and what you were saying about deep canvassing. If people don't know that as a tactic, you know, it's often, I think, about taking what are those spontaneous conversations and building a more intentional, replicable kind of tactic about it. I'm going to throw out one more comment to get some reactions from y'all, and then I'm going to try and leave room for at least one or two questions. But, you know, trying to bring back to our panel, our audience, many of whom may have, you know, and we love them, live in Philly or Pittsburgh or other places. So the first is something that I've heard Ezra Klein say, which is talking about polarization, and it's that all politics is nationalizing, meaning even, well, I'll just add that even where we are, that red-blue map that Laura pointed out, that is a more accurate picture of the political geography, and that local issues are still continually seen through that lens. Small example, I had a a township supervisor, I'm also a local official, accused me of having a socialist park policy when we were just trying to talk about keeping a park open, right? So like, why is that even a relevant comment in local politics? So that's the first sentence. All politics is nationalizing. At the same time, and I got this directly from Laura on a podcast she was on, all organizing is local. And the third is, right, here's the third statement, that the investments in infrastructure in rural areas are a feast and famine cycle tied to political campaigns, to presidential campaigns. So I'm wondering if the panel, do you want to reflect on that, or how does that shape trying to do this work specifically in rural geographies? Somebody jump in, save me. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that we're really proud of as Action Together NEPA is the fact that we live in our communities. We live here, we're here 365 days a year. We care about the same things that our neighbors care about, and we do work all through the year. It does not matter to us if there's an election coming up. Obviously there's always an election coming up, but it doesn't matter which election is coming up. We may do different types of work at different times, but we pay attention to what's going on in our communities always. The way our organization works is that, we do have a board of directors, and obviously we have to deal with the nonprofit status and all of those sorts of things. But the local activism comes up from our chapters and comes from our members. And that sort of thing is really critical. And I grew up in this area, I left, and then I came back. This has never existed here. It has never existed here. And, that's how I got connected with Jordy and with the hub, because I was born moreover in that region in Union County. It never existed there either in the sort of concentrated way, really mindful way that it exists now. So what enabled us to have a really successful 2020 program despite the pandemic is that we had been working for 3 years to make that happen all the time, no matter which election was coming up, no matter whether the party had come in and was setting up shop all over the place. We're going to do what we're going to do. We know where our people are that we want to get out to vote. We know the messages that work. And that's what we're doing. And we've spent all this time doing that. And, we had a 5-minute period where we joked that it'll be a little easier this year. Not quite so much going on, and that has not been the case. So we're, it's keeping our foot on the gas all the time and knowing that organizing, you don't get a day off from that. It's constant. Our communities have needs every day that need to be addressed, and having some systems in place to help do that is really critical. And in a lot of these places throughout the state have not existed and maybe still don't exist, and we still have opportunities to grow those networks.
So just a brief comment. Yes, to empower the people and to have true power, what Voice of Westmoreland realized is that we needed a full-time organizer, and we needed to pay that organizer to work on everything, all these issues throughout the year. There are over 1,300 individuals in Westmoreland County that engaged in actions. There are over 300 monthly dues paying members in Voice of Westmoreland. So that's what it enabled us to build. Okay, on the peripheral with regard to voting, one of the issues that I am working on with the Democratic Party and initiative that George Forte established for the Democratic Party in Fayette County is we are interested in, also with a partner, New Deal Dems, in finding out why people didn't vote in the past election cycle. In Fayette County, 70,000 registered voters, 10,000 Democrats approximately didn't vote. So with the assistance of Voice of Westmoreland and the systems and mechanisms that they have in place, we're able to replicate that in Fayette County. And now we have a call bank set up where people are calling out into the community and finding an answer to that question. And once we have enough data, we'll be able to look at it, but we're going to try and do an outreach to 7,000 people. So that's sort of where the rubber hits the road, is that once we find individuals that want to participate, we can show them actions that they can engage in.
I'll jump in with just two like mental images that I think are useful metaphors for thinking about the work that the fellow panelists here are doing. One is how a coral reef builds. Like, you know, if there's a place where the coral reef has been washed away, there's no longer structures on the ground for life forms to create a habitat and ecosystem. Then you've got to regenerate that somehow, right? You can think about rural areas and exurban or Rust Belt areas as places where the socio-organizational component of local life, except for maybe on the sort of more quite right-wing side, was washed away. You know, the decline of unions, the attacks on unions and union organizing, and the decline of progressive churches or sort of centrist Christian organizations and others means that in a lot of places, the kinds of local organizations that a generation ago in a place like Fayette County so tied people into their, you know, political life and voting and feeling like their voice mattered. And that was because of the United Mine Workers, that was because of their experiences of labor solidarity, or that was because of their experiences, you know, at the Catholic Church down the road, or et cetera. A lot of those local organizations have really decayed, leaving only, if there are, like, you know, local religious organizations are ones that are firmly allied on a sort of right-wing position. So, but it turns out you can actually rebuild a coral reef, right? You can create some structures and then people stick to them. And that's the story that Jess is telling you. That's the story that Mark is telling you, is that once you start building and you create something that people can stick to, then you've got people who can reach outward, right? You've got like the Fernie thing, and it reaches outward, and you've brought in new people. The new people who you've brought in have their own personal networks, not political networks, just personal networks that include folks who view things differently. They have loved ones who are, you know, firm Republicans, but that's fantastic. Oh my gosh, because then you are, you know, you're extending your network of trusted interlocutors. So thinking about the work as being a matter of like regenerating coral reefs, which is particularly difficult in rural areas where some of the socio-demographic trends have been against you, is, I think, maybe a useful mental model for the work that needs to be done.
It totally is. And I got to say, another one I learned from Laura is that county Democratic committees are often like a hermit crab shell, and other people come in, because I have seen that happen many times. Yes, so there's a whole picture book of the undersea civic infrastructures that Laura's helping us to see.
Yeah, just
sure.
Real quick, and I, you know, thinking about some of what Mark was saying about the folks who didn't vote, and looking at, there's a whole class of disenfranchised folks in rural Pennsylvania, okay, if you look within your jails and your prisons and you're formerly incarcerated, and these are people who've checked out of the political process entirely, but when you talk to them, they share a lot of our same values because they have some of the same underlying factors that have made their lives difficult, which is simply poverty.
And Nick, is it true also that some of those folks might also be not politicized in any left-right way, but when we talk about over-policing, civil asset forfeiture, the kind of jail without walls of the parole system, like they are kind of natural allies regardless of race, so that there's a lot of.
Yeah, exactly. And not just that, but, you know, often holding jobs because of their status that you know, doesn't afford a living wage, or living in areas where they feel like they're alone. And back to Laura's point at the beginning of it, and also often because there's no one talking to them, subject to believing in misinformation, and that if they do vote, then trends their overall voting patterns. But the type of people who vote, or type of people who are formerly incarcerated, typically aren't going to show up on your voter rolls as because there's huge gaps of employment, huge gaps of voting, and so on and so forth. And so we must not forget that there are a ton of people who have not been touched. And in fact, we saw this in 2016. A lot of Trump's support in central Pennsylvania came from first-time voters. you know, people who had checked out of the political process. And it was this populism message that did that. Well, we have the same populism, not the same, we have a populist message as well when you talk about progressive circles. We just have to learn to be able to connect those.
So I want to make sure we leave room for some panel questions. Nick, I think you wanted to talk about, somebody quoted Dr. Barber saying we have to go to the hollers and the hoods. So maybe start with there and be succinct.
I love that because I lived in hollers and hoods. And you know, all up and down the East Coast, and it's absolutely correct. But it always makes me think about one of my favorite things to talk about these days, and that is envisioning the system we want to build as opposed to just opposing the system that already exists. When we focus all of our energy on opposing the system that already exists, we're actually dealing with that fear-based messaging, which just ends up dividing us. But when we go with value forward messaging and value forward conversations and being trusted, I'm going to mess that pronunciation of the word up that Laura keeps using, interlocutors. We are able to focus then on a shared system that we're building together, right? And when we get to that shared value forward messaging, I think we'll find that the systems we're building tend to be more progressive than regressive.
Awesome. I want to bring up, I'm not quite going in order here, but I think it's important. Something I think, I forget who it was, they said something like 10% of the Pennsylvania population lives north of Interstate 80. I definitely think that the whole idea of progressive organizing needs to be very data driven. And we've done very little in this panel of something that I think is really important, which is to be very nimble in talking about rural geographies. I'll give you a quick example. Hazleton, which is in Columbia County, or maybe Jess, I don't know if you want to talk about it, but I think, I'm sorry, it's in Luzerne County, right? Yeah, Hazleton in Luzerne County is 50% Latinx. It is where Lou Barletta pioneered a former Democrat running on an anti-immigrant Trumpist message. He was sort of St. John the Baptist, since this were a religious conference. And they continue to be very underrepresented in both the Hazleton borough and in county politics. There's been violence issues in the school. So my point about Hazleton is, and especially when people want to compare Pennsylvania to Georgia, which I hear a lot of, absolutely there are things we can learn from the Georgia story and important things. And at the same time, the rural geography here is very distinct. I didn't really leave it, but somebody else want to talk more about Hazleton, Jess, or?
Yeah, I think the point about Hazleton goes back to one of the very first points that was made, is that Hazleton is not one thing. You know, there are a lot of different communities and there are a lot of different ideas for how to, you know, make Hazleton and the surrounding areas better. So just constantly having conversations, and then of course we have to then have a discussion about language access and the ways that that impedes the work that we're doing, because we don't know how to talk to people that we know we can find those connections with. So you know, there need to be very, very serious, and it's you know, it's something that I know some of our, you know, I know Nick is now with the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, like that's something that that organization is working on, is having language access. And one of the things that Action Together NEPA did, and I'm going to shout out Jordy for just 1 second and then I'll stop. I don't like to do that a lot, but when we did a canvassing program last year, we were really conscious about making sure that we had bilingual canvassers, not all of them, but at least a decent amount, because we knew that we needed to connect with people and we didn't want language to be a barrier any more than it already is. So I think just looking at those issues, because that exists all over the state, you know, those sort of barriers to communication, that once you figure out the solutions to those can really be a game changer.
I know that Rick Williams asked a question earlier about whether the gift ban would help with gerrymandering. I don't know if anybody wants to reflect more on that. I mean, I'll just throw this out. I mean, I think the gift ban is a good idea, and I have not done a rigorous study of the amount of money that flows into a lot of the state House and state Senate candidates. but honestly, I don't think they need it. I don't think that they're swayed by money. I think that may be more relevant for people in the Cowler counties. You know, people sometimes ask me if the county, you know, if Republicans in this area are very active. They don't really need to be, because they, you know, they're in local control of not exactly media, but of like how information gets talked about. Some of the ways Laura talks about, they are a numerical majority. So I think we have to be clear about that. You know, some of Laura's maps showed that Biden won by picking up in areas, but Trump still won those areas. So none of the 4 people on the call, none of us are under the illusion that we're this close to a progressive majority. We understand that we're doing hard stuff. Nick, you're making a face. Did I say something wrong?
Lou Barletta running for governor is what that face is.
Oh, okay, awesome. I'm glad it wasn't something I said. So anyway, I don't know that the gift ban makes a big difference, honestly. I mean, I think it should be done, but it's not. I don't know that it's going to bring a majority, you know, to a political campaign. But I would totally welcome disagreement for anybody else.
I'll just say this: I don't think it would be enough. It's very similar to what you're saying. I have a couple friends who work in finance for a financial consulting firm here in Pennsylvania, and they do all manners of races around the state. And one of those people, I'll never forget this, said to me, campaign finance in Pennsylvania is like the wild, wild west. And so that's the problem right there. It's not necessarily gifts, but it's the campaign finance laws or lack thereof.
Let's see, I've sort of lost track of some of the questions. I feel like there was one earlier in the chat. Did anybody else in the panel see one they wanted to answer?
I mean, I'll just jump in because there are a couple of questions in the chat about the sort of specifically political shifts. And what's quite true is that the trend, so the image that I showed is a vote swing, and at the top of the ticket, so that's in the presidential vote. So down ballot, part of that vote swing is because some folks who had voted against Hillary Clinton chose not to vote against Joe Biden. So which is to say some folks shifted their vote away from Donald Trump at the top of the ticket in rural areas as well as in urban and suburban areas. But the overall swing, especially in rural areas, but not only, was towards Republicans. So that's when you look outside of the presidential level. One way of thinking about that is just to say, you know, but the fact that then that there's not just a single uniform voting the whole ballot trend should also make us note that people are complicated. Like, just like regions are complicated, people are complicated. And that's another point that I think Ellen and some others raised in the chat. There are sometimes shorthands like Trump voter that get used in, as we like categorize, you know, the populist or political trends. But for practitioners, you should like throw away that language is not helpful, right? Because again, this is to reiterate what everyone on this panel has said. There are points of connection, and people have diverse views. People have in real life, people have extraordinarily diverse views. It's not just a single like progressive to conservative spectrum along which everything coincides. And so the question is finding out like, what's the point of entry for that person, or who is the right interlocutor? Sorry, I've got to stop saying that, right? Who is the right trusted conversation partner for that person who's going to be able to shift their views? And so you can think about the target, your goal as organizer, less as being, I'm going to have that conversation and I'm going to convince that person, but rather I'm going to convince someone to join me in becoming engaged, who is going to be the right trusted conversation partner for that person. So how do I bring on board the person who's going to be convincing, who is already trusted, who's already beloved by that person, who already has something in common, who's going to be able to join me in making the case for our shared values?
I mean, Mark, I'm going to maybe set you up here, but thinking about what Laura's been saying about interlocutor and trusted conversation partner is, you know, I dream about the ability to have an ongoing movement where people are either asked to to sort of share their list of contacts or given a list of people they already know to have those conversations with, as opposed to being given a geographically defined list of targets that a political operative defined. Does that make sense? So we have to kind of shift away from the every 2 to 4 year mode of like, we really need to have really deep, important conversations with people about their life perspectives and build this. Like I know one organization that was very active in Southeast Philly that I won't say leaned hard into relational and deep canvassing, and they were funded from national blue money and they left. And so they trained a lot of people to have great conversations. And I'm like, well, what's the point of training a Geordie to go out and talk to people who were, you know, voted for Trump in 2016 and are now questioning that or other things? Because all of that investment in that relationship, you know, unless Geordies continue to have ways to talk to that person, you know, it's a one-shot deal. Does that, Mark and I just met today, so I don't know what he's going to say.
Yes, no, that is a concern of mine and a problem that I'm sure many of the other panelists struggle with is the continuation, the velocity. Once the programs are going to continue and make sure they're repeatable and you can expand outward with them. Voice of Westmoreland, in my experience, has been unique in the ability to set up the programs and keep up the velocity with the issues that we're concerned about. Fayette County has failed in that regard. And I have to give credit, the phone banking we're doing to identify the issues with people, registered Democratic voters who didn't vote, to clarify, that's Stacey Abrams' playbook. You know, that's where we got the lead on how we need to start exploring those issues and then how we want to frame a message in Fayette County that goes directly to those issues. But we first have to step back and say, what is actually going on here? And I think that's key, but it also requires that after we do this initial analysis, we will have an answer that we can work with, move forward with, and then establish another program like Voice of Westmoreland so effectively and PA United do.
That actually leads me and gives me a perfect opportunity. There was a question in the chat about comparing Georgia and Pennsylvania. I would say, and the differences, I would say actually there's a big similarity, you know. I was actually born in Georgia on a military base, and I was there for basic training. I spent quite a bit of time in Georgia. And my predecessor with the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, Kadita Kenner, has moved on to be the director of the New Pennsylvania Project, which is mirroring the work of the New Georgia Project. So we are seeing that we're looking at this in terms of what are the similarities. And as Laura put in the chat earlier, we've got one of the largest rural populations in the country. Half of our Black population live outside of the major urban centers. And this is who the New Pennsylvania Project will be able to touch. There are vast similarities between Georgia and Pennsylvania, and I think we focus on those and the similarities between the people of Pennsylvania and each other, and that's kind of how we get to where we want to
go. Since we're kind of popcorning, I just kind of want to respond if I understood the chat right. When I said the gift ban may not matter, I was thinking very much about races very near me. In very, very red places where there's not really major media markets, you only need about $25,000 or $30,000 to win a state house race. So I think some of those candidates, and I may be overgeneralizing from a few districts that I know well, they just don't need that money. I imagine the gift ban might be much more consequential closer to urban areas like Harrisburg, Lehigh Valley, Erie, Pittsburgh, and Philly, obviously. Maybe Berks County, where they need money to compete in media markets, and they're taking money from the fracking. But I think, you know, kind of related to that, and I'll try and be quiet, is like fundamentally a lot of PA politics tilts to the GOP and to the corporate agenda because it has such a bastion of safe votes and safe seats in these rural areas we're talking about. And the path to changing those is a very complicated path because in some of those political districts, you're in places where maybe it could change in 1 or 2 cycles and there's some purpling. And in other areas where some of us live, it's not, you know, if I advocate for voting reform and protecting voting rights, I'm probably helping Republican votes, but I don't care because I'm going to do it. So there's 3 or 4 different political landscapes in rural PA, and I'm trying not to speak all of them as if they're the same. We've got about 5 minutes. So I've sort of, let's see, were there more things in the chat? Because I see the chat's really going interesting. Did any of the panelists see something in the chat you wanted to talk about?
Well, I just wanted to jump in on what you just said now about, you know, state legislature, safe state legislature seats. One of the things that's been really important, I think, about the emergence of groups like Voice of Westmoreland and like Action Together NEPA is that those are groups that not only don't think about politics only in terms of the presidential race, but also don't think about politics only in terms of state legislative races, right? So the very fact that there are so many different geographies of political positions means that I see groups again and again identifying the nearest available, meaningful seat or race that they can run or they can get involved in. It could be an issue campaign, it could be a local referendum, it could be a school board race, it could be, so there's a wide variety of stuff you could be doing. And in more rural areas where once you get to a large geography, it's going to be very hard to make headway. I see people identifying super small, it's like a borough council office that they're going to run for. But that campaign then gives you the chance to do the outreach, to bring in new people, to become trusted conversation partners, and to sort of do this work of like building out the coral reef. So I think there's a problem on the center left has been in the past thinking only in terms of the presidential or maximum, okay, we're being super, advanced and recognizing that state legislatures matter, but really these far down ballot races, including some issue campaigns, not partisan campaigns, can be absolutely critical for movement building as well.
As the moderator, we've got time for one more comment from like one of the panelists. It's a free-for-all, it's a cage match. Whoever jumps in first.
I'll be brief. Saw a comment in the chat, and I totally agree with it. It has to do with polarizing people because of the language we use in our discussions. And I think that's so critical moving forward, that in order to find common space and a safe space to have a discussion, we have to avoid that polarizing language. Thank you.
Awesome. I want to thank, of course, Nick Presley and Jess Britton Stewart, whose name I mangled, and Laura Putnam, who I've all known for a couple of years. Mark, it was wonderful to meet you, and thank you to Voices of Westmoreland and PA United, who, if I failed to say this earlier, was a really key partner for the 2020 UU The Vote outreach. I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Joan, who's the director for UU Justice. And
I want to thank you, Jordy, for pulling this together, and each of the panelists. It was very, very interesting, very interesting. So I'm now we're going to have a break. What is this? My ad? Start my video. Oh, I see. I'm just talking into the air. There I am. I'm back. So I knew this was going to happen, friends. It's 2:30. We have about a 15-minute break, and then we're going to have our legislative panel. And my landlord is fixing upstairs and pulling in equipment up the steps and making noise, and the dog is going to bark. So come back at 2:45. I'll try to calm the house down. Thank you all again. Thank you all.
thank you, everybody.
So Nancy, have our other panelists come in yet?
I don't know. I'm going to start this screen share and then I'll check on what's next.
Okay. All right.
Joan, I'm here, but I'm going to go try to deal with the noise problem here too.
Good thing, Eric. And Richard, you're on, correct? Richard Williams?
Yes, Richard was on before, yes.
Yeah, I thought so. I think he put a question in the chat too. So we'll give people a break.
Oops. Oh, yeah, no, that's good.
So welcome back, Unitarian Universalists of Pennsylvania. Thanks for sticking with it for the whole day. We're going to have a short segment right now, getting to know two Unitarian Universalists who are considering running for office. And we'll start with Richard Williams explaining why this is part of our mission and why we think it's so important that we recognize and support these folks. So Richard.
Thank you, Joan.
You're welcome.
As many of you know, UUJustice Pennsylvania realized that in order to make the world more just and peaceful and to address the issues of our justice teams, we not only needed to vote and express ourselves as we discussed this morning and this afternoon, but we also need to get seats at the policy-making tables, either by being elected or being appointed. We are now aware of 21 Pennsylvania UUs who serve on school boards or boroughs of supervisors or county councils or in the state legislature. And if you know of any, they come from 10 of our congregations. We have 37 congregations in Pennsylvania. 10 of them have public policymakers that we're aware of. And if you know of any others, please contact Joan Sabatino. The list is on our website. I first became aware of Steve Snell's campaign to run for the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in 2018. He ran it against an entrenched Republican. 2 years later, in 2025, Pennsylvania UUs chose to run for the Pennsylvania legislature. Jennifer Lugar from the Unitarian Society of Germantown, Diane Herron from the Unitarian Congregation of Westchester. She has been the mayor of Westchester, and she won and represents her district in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, and we'll hear from her later this afternoon. Peter Buck from the UU Fellowship of Sutter County, Shauna Danielson from the UUs of the Cumberland Valley, and Tara Zrinski, who had been the Director of Religious Education at the UU Church of the Lehigh Valley and is a member of the Congregation of the Larger Fellowship. And those folks really inspired us, and they showed our children and others how to do it. Whether you're elected or not, it is inspirational, and at some point in each of our lives, we should at some point be an appointed or an elected official. Tara and Eric Orts is with us today. Eric has also announced that he is exploring a run for the U.S. Senate in the seat that's being vacated by Pat Toomey in 2022. Tara is dealing with the reality of with the census redistricting Pennsylvania's legislative districts, and I know making some hard decisions, but I'd like to, Tara's with us this afternoon, and Tara, would you just give us your read on the political tea leaves, or how you see the political environment that you're in right now?
Sure. Well, again, I'm also running for re-election for Northampton County Council. So right now, what we're doing is we're really trying to focus on local elections and municipalities with the long-range goal of understanding that the lines are going to be redrawn. So while I am canvassing, and that's what I was out doing today, canvassing for re-election for the primary, I'm also recruiting other people to help support and further the Democratic and mainly the progressive wing of the Democratic Party in our local area. I actually think that this is going to be a really difficult election for many local legislators like myself. We have 5 individuals running for Northampton County Council in opposition to us that already have denounced the election, are trying to tell us that our election should be overthrown, recounted, that it's not legitimate. And at the county level, that's what we really, that's one of our core functions. We administer the elections. We voted on the machines. that do the ballots, tally the ballots, and we distribute the vote by mail ballots. And they're running on a campaign that says it's not legitimate. And they too are thinking long range, because what we found out is that all of them are being funded by Lisa Schiller, who ran against Susan Wild for Congress. So this is very strategic on their part to see the long range goals. And for me, I ran against the woman who is now State Representative Ann Flood. And this is a very Republican district. I think I did rather well. I got more votes than any other Democrat in that district. And we really tried to turn it out during COVID. It was really difficult. But that's going to be a challenge when they redistrict those lines. There are 4 seats that are possible that could be redistricted where I currently live. And that would be Democrat Lisa Boscola, Democrat Steve Samuelson, or if the lines are redrawn, I could remain in Representative Ann Flood or Senator Mario Scavello's seat. So there are 4 seats that, depending on where the lines are redrawn, I may or may not be eligible for. So it's very tricky in planning ahead for the elections to understand where I'm going to be, where those lines are going to be, what seat is going to be open. But my plan is to definitely run for a state seat at some point in time. If not in 2 years, then definitely in 4 years or in subsequent years, because my agenda is really one that needs to be fulfilled at the state level. When you're talking about social justice, environmental justice, and policy, and you're talking about equitable distribution of wealth and income, those are things that we need to do at the state and at the federal level. And to some extent, I can aid at the local level, and I definitely am doing that with all of my environmental ventures. I've coordinated an ad hoc community for industrial hemp to explore the economic benefits of that in my area and to introduce farmers to it. I've created a coalition of different environmental organizations who want to make sure that the Bushkill Creek doesn't have any more dewatering events. It's had 14 within the last 20 years, and we're really taking a close look at making sure our water is clean at the local level and that the Bushkill Creek is stable. And then also I'm battling the Penny's pipeline, which is right in our backyards. So there's so many local issues, and I'm talking to other municipal leaders as well and forming partnerships and coalitions with them so that we can strengthen the party within our own locality. Because I think that's going to be one of the most important things that we do in the future, is to make sure that we have support in our own region, like hyper locally, and then as broadly as we can, because what we're really finding out is that even at local levels, these elections are getting so expensive that they're really boxing people out who have the best intentions, maybe the best policy, maybe people who are best suited for the seat, but have trouble not only raising the money, but in their own lives trying to maintain their own income or their own status, because they're not super wealthy like Lisa Schiller. You know, I don't have $1 million in my back pocket. I don't have $500,000 to fund my campaign quarterly. And we're all doing things at the grassroots level. And I still have a lot of hope that people will see that, and that when they start talking to each other, that when we're able to go door to door again and meet face to face with people, that a lot of these things that really turned the populace in on themselves and hyper focused on like social media and television, things like that, once we open up again, people will not be as hyper-focused. They'll be able to talk and communicate. And a lot of the myths and the propaganda that was dispelled throughout 2020, I'm hoping that that is going to be eliminated or somewhat eradicated by the truth and being able to actually talk to people and verify facts and not have people isolated and alienated in their own little thought bubbles. So that's my take.
Sarah,
That's how I'm reading the tea leaves.
I appreciate it. We will be supportive at anything you decide to do, and we're glad that you have done.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce my good friend Eric Orts, who's a member of the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia. Eric is a law professor at Wharton School, and Eric, it's your show. What can you tell us a little bit of your thinking?
Well, thanks a lot. I very much appreciate the opportunity to just give a few remarks. I feel like completely throwing out what I have prepared to say after being involved with the amazingly great discussions that we've been having and since last night and then all day today. So my head is kind of swimming, but I'd like to first thank especially Rick, and I see Tim Steyer's on here too. Both of them were instrumental in starting to think about this somewhat ambitious idea of trying to run for the U.S. Senate, and we're encouraging. So Rick, it's going to be all your fault if this doesn't work out. But seriously, thank you to Reverend Joan, to Bill Clinton. I also see Brad and Julie Bradford on here who were very supportive. And I also, I see my mother on here. And so my greatest thanks go to my mother, Carol, and to my father, Keith. That's one reason I'm wearing this tie. I think I am the only one wearing this tie. You can see it has a chalice on it. It was my father's tie. We lost him about 3 years ago, but as I proceed in this process, I think I would not be here without my mom and also with my dad, without my dad's example. And I want to say a few things first about my Unitarian heritage. So we were talking about in the last session, who can you trust to support and to advance your values? And I really liked one quote, which I'm sure I'm going to use again, that we started out this morning with by Everett Hoagland: edit our thoughts so that our ethics are our politics. And I think that's really important, is to think about what are our ethics and how do we translate that into our politics. And so just 2 words about my heritage. My mom and my dad met in a Unitarian church when they were at Cornell, and then they went on an adventure and they raised me against my will, by the way, Mom. They moved to a small town 60 miles down the Ohio River from Pittsburgh, where my dad opened a single person veterinary practice. And they were founders of the UU Church of the Ohio Valley. And as I said, Rick, it reminded me of the UU Church, your congregation in the Wyoming Valley, where I just gave a talk. And by the way, anybody that wants me to come to visit them, I'm happy to give a quick introduction and talk about issues. Because right now, on the assumption we're moving forward with a campaign, and unlike some candidates, actually, I think all of them, I actually still have a day job that I have conflicts of interest and cannot actually declare campaign until I get done teaching and grading and things like that. So we are, though, very likely to enter into the race at this point. And this summer I will be free of obligations going into the next year on the assumption we do that. And would love to come and listen to issues everywhere in the state. So let me know. But one comment about that, I think going to the rural issues, is that because I grew up in a small town on the Ohio River in a steel and coal town, I have those values, and I have Unitarian Universalist values, but I also have the values of a small town, and I have an understanding of what people are dealing with in those small towns. And the fact of the matter is that many of these people have been abandoned by both parties. That's why we have this kind of polarization in my view right now. That's why we had a conversation in the last panel about how come the rural areas and the small towns have left. It's not because, it's not only because of the nefarious interests that are entering into these communities. It's also that the Democratic Party has not had positive policies to help people out. I believe we're now turning the corner right now The Biden-Harris plans, the infrastructure plans that are now being proposed and that should go through the Senate, if the Democratic Party can hold together, we are on a very positive trajectory. But that trajectory is fragile. It's only 50 votes to 50 votes in the Senate, and one of the key votes, I don't care who wins the primary. Let's have a nice primary in the sense that the Democrats aren't blowing each other up in the primary, and whoever wins, we have to get 100% behind that person, because we must make this state, this Senate seat in the United States, in Pennsylvania, blue. In 2022. So here are quickly two values that come from my Unitarian Universalist heritage that I believe inform my, first of all, my motivations for getting into the race, but then also what our primary issue is looking like. So two main issues motivating me to start to consider getting into this race. First, climate, which I know a lot about. The Biden-Harris plan is moving us forward on that. And I am very optimistic about that. We do not have to be doom and gloom about the climate. We have the technology. We have the business models. We now have the political framework in place to move us forward to a clean energy future. And yes, we're going to have to fight the oil and gas industry. Yes, including in Pennsylvania. We have to stop kowtowing to the oil and gas lobby in this state. And of course, the climate issue and other environmental issues accord with our seventh principle of respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part. Second big value for me, motivating me into this race, is the democratic process. Our fifth principle, the use of the democratic process in society. As Tara just said, and as others have also raised up, this is under assault, and we're not out of it. We're not out of the woods. And a lot of people have been talking about how the Republicans are basically willing to support completely anti-democratic authoritarian solution to getting power and staying in power. And it means oppressing the vote. It means suppressing the vote of Black and brown people and anyone else that they think will vote against them. They're prepared to actually go to Congress even after insurrectionists are in the Capitol, and our own representatives in Pennsylvania, save one, voted to not pay attention to our own votes. This is serious, and we all have to do what we can do, and I think I'm preaching to converted on that, to preserve our democracy and to strengthen it, and to, there's a lot of ways we can do that. Okay, so last point, and then I'd really like to hear your thoughts. I'm also, just want to mention, I'm very happy to see Representative Raub here. You've been indicated as someone who might be a potential UU, Representative Raub, so I want to warn you, you could be subject to conversion attempts, but really good to see you here. The main current theme, and we can change this over time, is we need to have universal health care, but that seems to be in the pipeline if we can continue that. My main theme, and this goes to our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And I believe if you look at this and you talk to families and you talk to what they're concerned about, or you look back on your own life and you say, what made a difference in my own life? I think it was that you had the ability to get a good, well-paying, family-sustaining job. It's jobs. Everyone should have the ability to have a job. And I believe that if we combine that basic principle, the dignity of work and the need for the government also to help people get the ability to work through education and others, as well as borrowing from our emergent eighth principle, which is that we must dismantle racism and other oppressions in our society. I think that's the way forward. I think that is at least a focus that we are thinking about taking right now. So I had lots of other things that I was going to say or could say, but I really want to make as much time available as we can for questions. And if we have time, and if we don't have time, I'm putting my website in there. I would be a crummy possible politician if I didn't ask you to please support and sign up. And then I'm also going to put my direct email and phone number in the chat. and really encourage you to communicate with me. I'm really looking forward to working with lots of people, going to lots of places in Pennsylvania, lots of Unitarian Universalist congregations, and meeting you, hearing about what you care about, and hopefully convincing you that I might be a good and trusted vehicle for your values in the U.S. Senate, on the assumption I'm running. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Eric. We will move on to the panel with Representative Herron and Representative Robb. I do want to briefly mention that UUJusticePA is actually two organizations. About 15 years ago, some very smart people from the UU Church of the Restoration, Julia and Brad Bradburn were among them, created both a 501c3 and a 501c4. UUJusticePA is our 501c4 and can actually do partisan work supporting candidates who we believe in, and we will be doing that. That ends this presentation of the two UUs that we know who will likely be running in 2022. Reverend Joan, will you want to take?
I'm going to jump right in here. I was not aware that my friend Rep. Robb has to leave at sooner than 4 o'clock. So we are going to introduce him. It's good to see you. I haven't seen you in a year. I look forward to being back live and in person. And welcome, Diane Herron. I also want to find your office so I know where to go and you'll see me often. So what I'm going to do, since I know that Rep. Robb has to leave shortly, I'm going to combine my two. I had 4 questions. I'm going to combine 2 of them and give you time to expound. And that's how we'll roll this, right? So, you know, I don't know how you're going to do it. Do you have a strategy for working with the other side? And what avenues do you see open to progressives in the Pennsylvania General Assembly? I'm thinking particularly of the Black Caucus takeover of the House floor. And I think it's sad, but necessary that we use some sort of out of the box tactics. And so I'm wondering if you have a plan, what's next? In conjunction with that, we have 6 different justice teams within UUJusticePA. And some of us believe that if we don't work on the good government end of it, gerrymandering and the gift ban and ranked choice voting and some of those things, that all the other issues are not going to get much attention. So if you could address those 2 questions for me, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to see some constituents, neighbors, and friends. I guess I will not be announcing a run for U.S. Senate since that's already been taken care of. But in all seriousness,
I'm breathing a sigh of relief.
I've heard many rumors about my political ambitions, so I just thought I'd put that out there. I'm glad to be on. Thank you so much for your substantive questions. First and foremost, there is a strategy that I've employed effectively because as an unapologetically Black progressive in a right-wing dominated General Assembly, I've had 4 bills enacted in my first 4 years in office, which is unprecedented, I believe, for certainly someone from Philadelphia. It's tough going. I did not believe I would be this successful, particularly with what's his name in the Oval Office for the first 4 years. But somehow I was able to forge relationships with my colleagues across the aisle. Look, I appreciate the UU community. I know your history, your politics and values. But at the end of the day, when you're an elected official, I don't care what your label is. I care how you vote. I care how you advocate and collaborate. I care about your ethics and integrity. And I work with a lot of devout Catholics who support the death penalty. They all say they're Catholic, but very few of them speak up around ending the death penalty. But the one who does is the one who I got to be my co-prime sponsor on my bill to repeal the death penalty. And that is my right-wing, ultra-conservative Catholic colleague, Frank Ryan from Lebanon County. We could not be more distant ideologically. but we agree on this issue and maybe 2 or 3 other issues. And that's what I focus on. I don't talk to him about reproductive justice. That is not a worthwhile conversation. I have to maintain my mental health. And so there are conversations I simply do not have with most of my colleagues. And when I was one of about a handful of legislators who took over the House floor last summer, it was not the Black Caucus. Just so you know.
Oh,
it was not a Black Caucus thing. It was individual folks, most of whom were Black, but not exclusively.
Okay.
Who came together without any permission or involvement, formal involvement of the Black Caucus or any other caucus, or the knowledge of the House Democratic leadership. And we did this. And then we had allies on the floor who literally blocked the entrances to the rostrum so that our colleagues, law enforcement could not rip us from that position. And we remained there for about 90 minutes. But we, in one sense, you can say it's a shame that this is what we had to do to pass, to get the attention and legislative action to move on substantive democratic bills that address police accountability. But the reality is, with these institutions, this is the norm. This is the norm, right? To assume that it would work any other way is not a reasonable thing in this country, in this society with these institutions. There were 19 bills that we presented to Republican leadership to say, these bills are bills that you have ignored in the Judiciary Committee on which I serve that address police accountability in one way or the other. The ones that came back to move on did not include the one that allowed police officers to essentially rape people in custody and get away with it. That was not one of the bills that they said, we'll move on. Now, we moved on them months later. It got absorbed into a Republican bill, but that was my bill. It did not make it to the final cut that Republicans wanted to move on. This is the reality of Harrisburg.
Mm-hmm.
This is a state where slavery was the state law, and the Speaker of the House, who left a year ago, who was in office for 20 years, said behind the rostrum that he didn't even know slavery existed in Pennsylvania. This is the top lawmaker in our state, in the largest full-time state legislature in the country. He was a lawyer and a Speaker of the House for 6 years, and he claimed ignorance about the worst institution in our country and part of the original sin, along with us building a Commonwealth on stolen land. This is the context. We can make change, but we have to understand that all the things that worked in the past, nonviolent direct action, mass protests, those are the things that allowed us to move forward. The things that we can embrace and believe are what makes our society stronger and better and more unified have come from that resistance, have come from that moral courage. And that's something that we have to continue. And that's difficult. It's hard being the only person to vote against the bill that looks good on paper and that might get you jammed up for re-election because this bill would punish pedophiles. Why do you like pedophiles? And you have to explain, you have to trust your constituents and the people you serve and say, this is not what it seems to be. And I think authentic, passionate public service is in short supply in Harrisburg and in most positions of power, but this is the work. And UU community knows these values, but speaking up and making sure that these, how we hold our public servants accountable is your responsibility. And just on a quick point, I'm not allowed to have this conversation on a government computer or on my cell phone or use my staff to do anything beyond scheduling it. So I actually thought this call was about policy and not about politics and campaigning. So I had to go to my schedule and change things because I have to abide by the ethics of this state, which are pretty low in many instances, but I have a very high standard. Why do I have a high standard? It's because I'm a Black man, and the double standard is so extra. A Black man from Philadelphia and a Democrat. So the scrutiny on me is 10 times greater than my counterpart. And so I have to dot my I's and cross my T's. And that's important in Pennsylvania, because in Pennsylvania, I could receive a Tesla, and as long as I reported it, it's not bribery. I could receive, someone could buy me a summer house, a lobbyist, and as long as I disclose it, it's okay. I could receive $10 million from any wealthy person on this call to my campaign, and that's totally legit. If I run for Senate, I'm not able to. These are issues that infect everything else that happens. So this notion of good government is more than rhetorical, and I'm glad you all appreciate that, because it's true. Gerrymandering, campaign finance reform, having a gift ban, issues around ranked choice voting, which is my bill. All of these things are really important, and whatever your issue is, everything else is secondary, because this is the foundation on which our participatory democracy and our legislative branch is based.
Thank you. I just one quick further question. I saw in the Pennsylvania Capital Star this week that there's a new caucus, and I believe you're part of it.
Yes, I really didn't like the fact they called it a caucus, because it's really an informal group of Democrats and Republicans, 8 on one side, 8 on the other, from ultra conservative to, very progressive. That would be me, and quite a few moderates along the way. And so I really wouldn't call it a caucus, because a caucus is open to anyone. This was something else, but people in their titles, but the bigger point is, we came together and said, there are institutional reforms that we can embrace irrespective of our political ideology, that we respect the body and the history and its import in our Commonwealth. And we don't believe that I should have a different email suffix than a Republican who's next door to me. So if you haven't noticed, if you haven't lobbied via email your local state rep, if they're a Democrat, their email ends pahouse.net. If they're a Republican, it's pahousegop.com. That's absurd. This doesn't happen in other states. There's a Democratic printer on the House floor that I guess uses Democratic ink. There are Republican photographers that only take pictures of Republicans. And we're spending unnecessary money for this type of duplication because of partisanship. So I'm working with a wide range of folks across the aisle and in my own party to dissolve some of these institutional relics that make partisanship the norm when it doesn't have to be the case, irrespective of the actual power dynamics of the members themselves.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Please stick around for a little bit if you can. Yes. Diane Herron, UU from Westchester originally, the mayor of Westchester.
Yes.
And now a House representative. Can you answer those two same questions? If you have strategies for working with the other side, and how important is good government to get anything done? I've shortened them up.
Okay, so how to work across the aisle. I am what they call a freshman in Harrisburg, even though I'm probably old enough to be most people's mama. But just based on my limited experience so far, I do think the idea that Rep. Rabb was just talking about is in terms of, getting together and focusing on some of these essential concerns that we share is an excellent idea. And I've been working with Rep. Kinsey to build up what we're calling the No Label Caucus, which, I don't want it really to be a redundant effort with what Representative Rabb and his colleagues are doing. But I think the idea is the same, to reach across the aisle at every opportunity and to you know, get together on these fundamental core issues that we do share, whether we want to admit it or not. And that's something I learned in my 3 years as mayor of Westchester, because when you're a mayor, it is not as political as being a state representative. I worked very closely with people who are actually very conservative Republicans, Trump supporters, but we had a lot in common because it was about our neighborhood, it was about our community, it was about safety. And so just based on my experience in Westchester, I do think this is a worthwhile endeavor for sure. The other thing that I think we all need to do is to think about how we talk about issues and how we frame issues, both with our colleagues and with our constituents. Because oftentimes we use language that puts the other side on the defensive almost immediately. And I think if we can maybe think a little more critically about how we're talking about these issues, we might be able to make some inroads. And a quick example for me is when the governor came out with his budget proposal, which frankly contains some rather liberal concepts in it, like fair funding of public schools and a minimum wage that would go up ultimately to $15 an hour. I wrote a position paper for my constituency about this, and I thought very long and very hard about supporting the governor's proposal because I'm in a purple district. I have a lot of conservative constituents who are quite wealthy and really don't share the support of some of these issues. So, but I worked really hard to make sure that they understood the rationale behind fair funding and the economic, if no other benefit, there are economic benefits to ensuring that all of our children get a fundamental basic education. And I was sure to point out in there that in the governor's proposal, there is no there's no proposal in there to take money away from districts like the district that I represent, the Westchester Area School District. It is simply to take more of the funding and put it to the schools that need it the most. So I was able to actually pull some people over to this idea because they said, okay, well, we're not going to lose out in Westchester, but we can also you know, put more resources where they're needed most. And I did the same thing with the minimum wage proposal in his budget, where I talked about the idea and the fact that with a $7.25 minimum wage, we are all participating in a poverty economy. We are basically fertilizing poverty in our country by saying it's okay to pay people a wage that is entirely insufficient. I mean, they cannot support themselves, they can't support their families, they can't keep a roof over their head. And I appealed to them and I said, is this really what you want? Is this really what we want? And I got some letters back and people said, it's really not. And so I do think that it's our role and responsibility to think about how we're talking about these issues and to try to frame things in a new and a fresh way that won't put them on the defensive, both in terms of dealing with our fellow legislators and also with our constituents. So I'm actually banking on this approach to get me reelected in 2 years, to show my constituents that I care, that I hear them, and I want to have a real productive and meaningful discourse with them so that we can work together. And so far, I've gotten some really positive feedback from them. You're muted.
So Rep Rob, you're still here?
I am.
Good. Okay, because I didn't want to ask just one of you this question. You both ran as Democrats in November 2020 PA election. And could you take a look back and analyze how limited resources were used to support progressive candidates? And is there anything that can be done about that?
I need some clarification on that question because I'm not independently wealthy and because large donors did not give me big bucks. I want to fully understand where you're coming from with the question.
I've heard from people who have run and people who have won and people who have lost, and I hear a theme that maybe the Democratic campaign, not the party, but the campaign team could allocate resources differently.
All right, so I'm getting a better sense of the question. So we have to talk about the infrastructure. And I should say that despite being a ward leader in the highest voter turnout ward in the city of Philadelphia, and I'm no longer, I stepped down a couple months ago, and being a Democratic committee person for 15 years and being a lifelong Democrat, I don't really have a lot of options. Mm-hmm. I have no real allegiance to political affiliation. I have an allegiance to my values and to the communities to whom I ascribe. And so in Philadelphia, if you're not a Democrat, you got to be a rich white Republican who's, you know, kind of liberal on social issues.
Right.
If you're not a rich white guy, you know, who's liberal on social issues, who's a Republican, you got to be a Democrat. The only exception to that is my friend, council member Kendra Brooks, who's the first non-Republican, non-Democrat to win citywide office in, I think, over 100 years. And I was proud to support her, which got me huge blowback from the Democratic machine in Philadelphia. I'm not held in high regard by my establishment Dem colleagues across the city and across the state for that matter. So I am a titular Democrat, but I'm a progressive. Those are my values, and that will stay with me irrespective of the political machinations that happen around me. But the calculation for me is very different than what it is for Rep. Herron. She's in a purple district. I'm in the bluest dot in the entire Commonwealth. I had the highest voter turnout in the entire state. Even my Republicans next door to me, I think, might have voted for me. It's a very different dynamic. My Republicans next door are more liberal than most of my Democratic colleagues in Harrisburg. So my opinion is highly related to the bubble in which I live, and serve. But I have a bigger view that transcends my district, my neighborhood, my city, and that is that if you believe in progressive politics and you believe there should be a greater ideological diversity that represents those of us who are, and I hate this left-right business because it's really not precise, but for those folks who are more enlightened, progressive-minded, then we need to fund those candidates, and we need to invest. We need to walk the talk and invest in the type of candidates that represent the demography and diversity of our Commonwealth. And, you know, I worked for the first Black woman U.S. Senator, Carol Moseley Braun, in my 20s. Just her showing up evolved an institution almost overnight in sometimes the most nuanced but important ways. She showed up one day on the Senate floor wearing a pantsuit, and the sergeant of arms saying, "You can't come down here dressed like that." And she said, "Excuse me?" And that tradition died in that moment because no one was telling her that she had to leave the Senate floor. It was absurd. And in Harrisburg, I have to wear a tie, but I don't have to wear a mask.
Yeah.
So these are traditions that have to be pushed up against. And for those of us who are not establishment, those of us who are not independently wealthy, those people who do not come from family wealth. And by the way, when I talk about family wealth, I don't mean rich. I mean, as a Black middle-class person, I'm 6 generations college educated. and there is no significant financial wealth in my family. And for every dollar of wealth that a white family has with the same income and educational background, a Black family has a nickel. So I have to work 20 times as hard to raise the same amount of money, irrespective of my fancy, Ivy League degrees. And that's deeply, deeply problematic. So if we want to put our values to work, we need to identify, recruit, train, and fund a diverse array of progressive candidates in a diverse array of geographies, which is why one of the reasons I was so thrilled to support Tara, because there are no progressives running in Lehigh Valley. That's absurd, whatever. But she was doing great. She was organizing and making a difference. And just because she didn't win the first time doesn't mean she can't come back and win. We are represented all across the Commonwealth, but we have to come together and be strategic about that.
Not an easy job, I agree. Thank you for serving. Diane, do you want to take a shot at that?
So I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again? It's still a little unclear to me.
So I've heard from people who have run for office in the Democratic Party, primarily, that have won and that have lost. And they both indicate they wish that funds were distributed more fairly. Let's see, I think it's one of the words I had. Let's just leave it there.
So I get I get that. One thing that kind of surprised me as a new rep, and I jumped into the race quite late because it was an unusual circumstance. I didn't get in until the general election. I wasn't in the primary, and essentially I was told I had to raise a whole lot of money really fast. And
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And I thought, well, how the heck am I going to do that? And what does that mean in terms of my ability to stand for what I'm telling my constituents I represent if I have to take money from all kinds of special interests and different organizations? And I did think to myself, I'm in a purple district. It's not entirely safe. Why can't the party help me? I wish I had answers to those questions. I think that the real issue is that people like to say our system is broken and it needs to be fixed, but I like to say our system is fixed and it needs to be broken, because the reality is—
Good way to put it.
Reality is we have to raise a whole lot of money to fend off attacks and to put out very expensive mailers. And we are, for the most part, on our own in terms of finding ways to do that. And, really the only way to raise that kind of money is to take money from special interests. And that's the problem. It's not really how money's distributed. It's how we have to raise it. So back to my earlier discussion, I am working really hard to communicate in a way with my constituents that will help them to feel heard and help them to understand some of the complexities of what's going on in Harrisburg. And I have established a district office that I call my dream team, because they are working really, really hard and really well to serve my constituents. And it's my hope that I don't have to raise so darn much money from all these special interests, and that my constituents will want to vote for me again. I'm kind of trying to go back to basics a little bit in order to be a successful representative and to affect change from the ground up.
Thank you. Rep. Rabb, final comment here?
I'm gonna try to stick around a little longer.
Good.
This is a really good exchange here, and I'm so glad to be a part of it. So, I don't take money from anybody. I make that choice. I also limit myself in terms of how big a check I receive, because I can receive, there are colleagues on both sides of the aisle who've received literally hundreds of thousands of dollars in one check from one source. I think that is corrosive to our democracy, irrespective of the political ideology or party affiliation of that member. That's problematic. I found out that I was a soccer dad for many years, and I found out that one of my fellow soccer dads was a fellow Yale alum. So we were talking and chatting, and then we were asking what each other did. I told him what I did, and he kind of raised his eyebrows and asked him what he did. And he was in the C-suite at Comcast. So he made more in a year than I will likely make in a lifetime. And so I was raising money. And I had to think to myself, clearly I got to ask him for money, but how much should I ask for? Because, he blows his nose with a, $1,000 bill. But I didn't want the largest contributor to my campaign coming from someone who worked for a corporation that I have issues with. And so that's why to this day, my largest political contributor is my mommy. That's a choice I make. And I go for quantity and quality. So I have over 1,000 donors, and it's a lot hard. It's much harder work, but I know that when I go to Harrisburg, other than my mother, I'm independent. I don't have to worry about what the trade unions say or what these folks say, because I know I'm represented. I was brought to office and supported by regular folks who I went to kindergarten with, folks, ex-girlfriends, neighbors, former colleagues. These are folks who funded my campaign over the years, and I'm proud of that. And it allows me the freedom to speak my mind, because even though I'm in a very blue district, I still can get in a lot of trouble, right? Because it may be easy for me to be reelected, which if you follow my career, you know that that's not actually true. But it makes it really hard to govern, because sometimes you're the one who's taking a vote where Democratic stakeholders are saying, we want you to vote this way. And it's not in alignment with my progressive values. And I've been there, and it is isolating. It is disheartening, but it is a reality that we all need to be aware of, because if people are relying on the usual suspects for those big checks, it tests your politics, which means that we have to invest on the front end to make sure that folks remain independent, irrespective of their values. That's really, really important.
Yeah. And I think values is what's important, right? And knowing that our leaders' values. And also, I have the personal experience of standing in a representative's office and being told, and this was not, this was what might be considered the Democratic or more liberal party, let's put it that way, right? Who said, no, how much money I get from somebody doesn't affect what I do in this office. And I was just like, I don't even want to talk to you anymore, because you're not speaking truth to me, or sense, even logic sense to me, right? So
it buys access. That's an important distinction. Yeah. The size of the money buys access. That is not the same as buying a vote, because that's actually illegal. You can go to prison for that, but it's buying access. And that we shouldn't allow for that to be legal, to be able to buy access. There should be a level playing field. And it sounds idealistic, but it's not. And I see in the chat, folks are talking about public financing.
Yeah,
absolutely. These things matter. And when we talk about equity, because this is UU, so I know, your values. When you're talking about equity, that influences everything for the type of candidate who can run. Listen, it was really hard for me to get elected 5 years ago. I was elected, I won the Democratic primary 5 years ago plus 2 days. And I wasn't supposed to have won. I was a middle-aged, cisgender, straight father of 2 with 2 Ivy League degrees, who had worked in the White House and on Capitol Hill, who had written a book, done all these things. And they said, you don't even have a chance. You're not viable. Me with all of this privilege. What about the disabled immigrant Latinx woman who's extraordinary, great ambition, intellect, hard work, great values? What are her chances? So when they could say that about me with all the privilege I have, that is a condemnation of a system that is deeply, deeply flawed. Although I do like what Rep. Herron said about that. I like your quote much better. I think that is dead on, but that's a really important distinction.
Hey, Rep. Rab, I don't know if you noticed in the chat, but you've been called a closet UU.
Yeah, I saw that.
That is a high compliment. I get that. I bet that's from Eric.
Yeah.
Yep, sure it is.
Yeah,
right.
Or people from the restoration who know you well, I think. Right.
Look, I just want to say this, and I do have to go. I don't normally talk about my faith publicly. I'm private in that way. I do try to be transparent. I'm always authentic. And I wouldn't be here if it weren't for my ancestors, one of whom was a radical Presbyterian minister and abolitionist named Reverend Amos Noah Freeman. And he worked with all of the radicals in Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York. He spoke with Frederick Douglass, was his colleague, and William Still here in Philadelphia, and other folks. And I've inherited this tradition and these values. All the privilege that has built up in me, that is manifest in me, has come from this place fighting systems. We got these privileges in spite of the systems that held back Black folk. And I'm using it in furtherance of social, racial, economic, gender justice. This is what I believe in. I couldn't say no to you. Like, you all understand this, right? I'm in good company when I speak this way, but I'm often, this falls on deaf ears. This falls on deaf ears, even among some of my white liberal colleagues and constituents who feel that what we're talking about now is too radical for them, or it's too controversial. But we have to address these issues head on. We have to have the difficult conversations and not be about blame, but about solutions and coming together. That's what I've experienced from those of you who I know in the UU community and beyond. That's what it's going to take to move forward. And I know that when I do something that may cast some concerns from a lot of my colleagues and other stakeholders, I know that I can count on the UU community to get my back. And that's why I wanted to make sure I came on and paid my respects and had this conversation with you. And I didn't know, Rep. Herron, that you were one of these radicals. It explains why we hit it off so easily.
There you go.
The rep and I are we sit right next to each other. She's right in front of me. So I'm figuratively and literally in good company.
I'm a closet radical, Rep. Rab.
All right. Well, it's a closet with a big transparent window on it.
Right.
Well, I thank you. I thank you for coming. I think Diane indicated to me earlier that she also would be happy if we ended a few minutes early today. So we've had a long weekend. We're talking about politics and strategies and values. And once again, I think it all comes down to relationships, honesty, truth, right? And values. And glad you're at our camp, both of you. That's what I'll say. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
If I may, Joan, I would just like to thank you and everyone here, because you were so supportive of my campaign, and you continue to be so supportive and really inspirational to me to keep
You're welcome.
doing this work. So thank you so much.
We're with you. We're with you. Both of you.
Means a lot.
Good. Thank you. All right. I'm going to say one more thing to my UU folks who are part of this conference here, whatever we're having, annual meeting. My job now is to remind you about a couple things. Are you going to a Halloween party, Peg Dobrinska? So the first is that we have every other month we have all UU planned calls, And these are an opportunity to get out of our silos, talk about broader issues than one issue. And we have one coming up on May the 4th. And we're going to be talking basically about the ballot initiatives that are going to be on the ballot. I think oftentimes they come at us by surprise. Just heard yesterday someone who's on this call who is a registered independent who said, I don't even think about the voting at the primaries because I didn't know I could, and I don't pay attention. I think it's all about who's going to be on the general race, so I don't think about the primaries. Second thing so May 4th, you'll see it on our website.
I put it in the chat, Joan, too. So I just put the link in the chat.
Good, it's in the chat. And then also the May 18th is a voting day, right? And it's not only voting for down ballot candidates local, it is also the day that there will be these 4 votes, right? 3 constitutional amendments to the Pennsylvania Constitution and 1 referendum. And so no matter how you vote, I hope you vote the way we think you should, but make sure people get there. People don't know that they even can vote. So make sure your neighbors know and your friends know. The third thing is I have to ask you all to remember to donate. We need your support, your financial support. Anita Menser came after listening to the earlier this afternoon rural and small city panel, said, if it's the same concept, if everyone who is currently a member of UUJusticePA brought along one friend, and they don't even have to be a UU really, but one friend or one congregation member to support us, we would reach our goal of 600 members increase from 300 to 600 this year, and we would reach our budget. So it's, it's $40 or more for what you can give, but a minimum of that, or really what you can give all the way around. It's just all of us, just like the UU worship this morning. It's all of us giving our little 1/8 of a teaspoon or 1/16 of a teaspoon, or whatever it is. So think of us when you have the moment. Our website gives you options. Someone asked in the chat, or I think that was last night, that you can give to UUJusticePA or UUJusticePA Education Fund. The only difference is that the Education Fund is tax deductible, and the other entity, the UUJusticePA, is what Richard mentioned earlier this afternoon. That gives us the ability to do 5014C work, which is partisan work, and gives us the ability to do it. Anyone else have anything to say? Go take a walk outside. I think it's nice, at least here in Harrisburg. It's not sunny anymore, but it's still very nice out. And thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being a part of our work, and you'll hear from us again.
Nice work, Joan.
Thank you.
People can unmute and say goodbye if they want. I think you have power.
Bye.
Bye.
Nice work, UUJusticePA. Way to go.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
The work is not done.
Hey, Karen.
Yes. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. I think it was good. It was fun. Right?
Can I stay on with you, Joan?
Yes.
Good.
Anybody who wants to stay on, can stay on.
Yeah, this is where you see the folks that wandered away.
So I don't know if Travis, are you still on, Travis Farah?
Yes, ma'am.
So Eric Orts is considering and indicated today that is pretty sure he will be running for the Senate.
Thank you. I was taking notes for the Social Justice Committee at my church, and I didn't want to put that down wrong.
Okay.
Sorry, I just had to There was just stuff I had to do, but thank you.
It's okay. Summer, he'll probably announce in the summer. That's what he said.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It was very, very good.
So Joan, did you want to do a little wrap up? I can kick out people that have wandered away from the meeting,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yes, kick out people.
Who do you want? Who do you want
Clinton
still
to
here?
stay on. Any board member can stay on if they're interested. Ruth Thomas, if she's still on, could stay on.
So I'm going to tell you. So your Restoration Philadelphia, is that one to?
That's Tim Steyer.
That's Tim Steyer. Is it Tim or is it McKinley was on earlier?
Tim Steyer's here as well.
Okay, so Tim, stick around.
Okay. Tisha or Tesha?
Don't know, Tesha.
Hi, everybody.
Okay.
It's Tisha.
Tisha. Hi, Tisha. What congregation are you from?
Unitarian Society of Germantown.
Welcome.
Thank you.
That means you're a special person.
Absolutely.
Germantown.
Love that Germantown folk.
So are those that, so we're wrapping up so the meeting is ended and we're going to do our own little retrospective.
Debrief.
So yeah, debrief. So if you're not part of that planning group, you could leave now. I can send people out. So I have Dave Hunter, Gail Burgess, Karen Sykes.
My guess is they walked away from their computer.
That's why. I mean, and I can shoot them away. I just need to I don't want to shoot somebody that you think should be here. Can you look at the participant list? You can do it too, Joan. If you press more, you can say remove. So if there's someone you don't want to have in our debrief, you can say goodbye.
Okay.
Just send them out. We have power.
Karen, you stick around.
Okay.
Just had to walk around a little bit.
That's what I figured. So I'm going to kick you out, Karen.
Huh?
It's over. You missed the goodbye.
Oh.
I'm
Glad you
kicking
were
you
here.
out.
Oh, well. Okay.
Talk soon. Take care.
All right. Take care.
Yeah, Burgess. Hunter. I think that's it.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Well,
Whoa. So first, a couple of deep breaths.
Oh my gosh.
yeah, we did it. And we had 70 people, 83 at the height.
Do you want me to stop recording? I can stop recording.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Thank you.